Hi everyone and welcome to today's Technology Lunch. You might have noticed it's not Wednesday today, it's Thursday. So this is not our usual streaming schedule. This session today is actually a very special edition of the Technology Lunch because today is also the first ever INNOQ Accessibility Day. And this session right here is actually part of it. It's part one. And before we start, let me explain really quick what this day is all about and why we're doing this. In a way, it's really simple because accessibility is a topic that really matters to INNOQ, both internally and externally. Internally, when it comes to the way we communicate, we work together, and when it comes to the applications we use, because we want everyone to participate. And externally, when we talk about the products and solutions we develop. So unfortunately, accessibility is also a topic that lacks the awareness and the status that it should have. So we decided to use this day to raise awareness for accessibility and also share some of our experiences and expertise in this field. I mentioned earlier, this is part one. There will also be a second part that starts tonight at 6 p.m. And this session is in English, you might have noticed, but tonight it's in German, so a little bit for everyone. And tonight it's going to be a special edition of the INNOQ Technology Night. We will be talking about an accessibility workshop we did for one of our clients called Naturamos, which is a really special company because they, in terms of accessibility, they didn't just do what they had to do. They went far beyond that and managed to use accessibility as a USP for them. And we have Sophia Steinmetz from Naturamos with us, and she will share some of her insights from a client perspective. And we also have a panel discussion with Stefan Tilkoff, our CEO, and Philip Gardier, member of the managing board, and Andreas Meyer, who is a senior consultant here at INNOQ and who is also blind. And they will talk a bit about how we try to bring terms like diversity and accessibility to life here at INNOQ. So a lot of interesting stuff going on tonight. So I really hope you have the chance to join us tonight. If you haven't registered yet, registration is still open. Feel free to sign up and join us tonight. Now it's time to hand over to Joy, who will be demoing Spacy today. Spacy is our universal design application that we use for our internal online open space events. And Joy will explain in detail how it works and how you can build accessible web applications from the ground up. One last thing, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to post them in the chat box on the right-hand side. We will get back to your questions whenever it fits in. So this is it from me. Joy, on to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here today because Spacy is an application that I worked on together with my colleague Jan Stempion. And we were really excited about it. We had a lot of fun making it, and we really enjoyed making it. But today I want to just demo what the application is, and also talk about why we developed it. So at the beginning of 2020, or in the middle of 2020, when everything kind of went crazy, and we started to have our events online, our remote events online, most things worked quite well. But one issue that we had was we like to do open space events, which is kind of an open, it's an open moderation technique, so everyone can bring their own ideas and topics and build an agenda together, which we then use for the next 2 or 3 days or however long we have for our open space event. So this is, we have this tradition at INNOQ. In a lot of our events, we have some kind of open space component where we, create an agenda together. And for the INNOQ events, we wanted to do that in a remote format as well. That did work. And in the first few events, we had used a Miro board in order to kind of organize the session. And it was interesting because with the Miro board, it used to be called real-time board. It's an online whiteboarding tool where you basically have Post-it notes and everybody can move their Post-it notes, and you can build different things to make like different frames and add different shapes and text and all sorts of things. So using Miro, we were kind of we're trying to rebuild this open space atmosphere on the web with this tool, but it had a major issue, and that was that it wasn't accessible. It wasn't screen reader accessible in this instance. That was the main issue, because one of our colleagues, Andreas Meyer, who will be giving a talk this evening, he is blind and he has to use a screen reader, and it was just so irritating when we're, because we want to include everybody, but we didn't have the right way. We didn't have a tool really to do this open space moderation. So we would would use this Miro board, we would have a Zoom call open, and then at the end, Andreas would have to say, oh yeah, but can you tell me, like, when was this slot again, and when was this slot again, and could you let me know, like, which slot is open, and it was kind of just irritating, that this information, which is on the web, it wasn't accessible to every user at INNOQ, and so because it's just irritating, and the web should be open for everyone. That's what I think was a big part of my motivation. There's no reason why this information has to be hidden from people. We're typing on our computers, we're putting something on the web, and that means that it's there in digital format, so it should be able to be accessible for screen reader users. And so I had this idea, maybe why don't we just, I was like, I had this idea for how the front end would work too, like a new front end architecture kind of on the technological side, which I got excited about. I was like, oh, you could build it like this. But then, so then I just talked about it, and I was like, I kind of want to build this. And one of my colleagues said, yeah, well, why don't you have the students build it? And I was like, I want to build it. So I ended up actually just taking some time out from my project schedule to build this together with a colleague. And I really was excited about it because this is a live interactive application. I've built a lot of applications in the past. I've always tried to take accessibility into account as much as possible. But here we have an application where we actually want to input something into the application and then have this kind of interactive live update feeling. And I wanted to try to learn how to do that using accessibility. How can we make sure that these information, like any changes that are added to the UI, make sure that they are also accessible and will also be read out to screen readers. So that was one of my main motivations for developing this application. And so here we see, this is a demo of the application that we have used. I think we used it 3 or 4 times for our internal events so far. And this is actually, you can see the first barrier that we found when we were doing accessibility testing. When I developed this, I wanted to kind of be agnostic about it. Wouldn't necessarily have to have a login in order for someone to use it. And so what I did is that I built this app, and then there's a link here which says set your display name. And you need to set your display name in order to be able to use the application, which we can do. So I can show you how that works. I can set my display name. And then I'm kind of logged in here. And so then I have this form field with a title and description. But when we tested this for accessibility, we found that was completely confusing. Why do I have to set a display name? So what we did is, in order to fix that, we hooked it up to our internal single sign-on. And that meant that this whole action of having to set a display name fell away, and that's improved the accessibility of the app. And as I always like to say, when you improve the accessibility, say, of screen reader users, you end up improving the experience for everyone. So that was one of these things where we fixed it, and it really improved the experience for everyone. Now they just have to, when they log into our Spacy instance, they don't have to set their display name or anything. They can just use their INNOQ login, and then their display name is set based on our INNOQ names, yeah, usernames. So now I'm going to actually add a session. So if I want to add a session, I can say something like demoing Spacy. Yeah, and Spacy is an accessible open space organization tool. So I can submit the session, and then you can kind of see, so here's the first step. You kind of see that the UI changed a little bit. So I want to go through some of the things that I implemented here, which affect the accessibility. And one is right here. So I have my dev tools open here. But so if we look at this, notification here, we can see this has a role region and aria-live polite, those two attributes. Okay, now it disappeared. Yeah, now it disappeared because Stephanie added something. But the idea is that when I added my session, I got this notification which told me, okay, here your session was added to the queue. So that's really important for accessibility, that if you add something and change the UI, if you can add like a little message, oh yeah, the thing you wanted to do, it actually worked. It was successful. Then that adds like it increases the accessibility of the application. What we also saw is that I didn't hide that information as visually, because it's also helpful for all users to have this kind of feedback information. And that's one thing I really paid attention to in developing this application, is that I really wanted to when something is necessary for screen readers, I wanted as much as possible to also integrate that into the design, the core design itself, so that it's available for all users in order to improve their experience. So this application is really intended to improve, we are intending to try to build up the same feeling as an open space event. So at an open space event, what you do is you usually come to the center, you write on a post-it note what session you want to suggest, and then everyone stands in a line, and then one after another, we all go around and we suggest our session, and then we put it on a bulletin board that has an agenda kind of marked out on it, and so then we create an agenda together. So that's the same idea here, is that here on the left-hand side, I have my queue, where I have my different sessions in the queue, and we really have to go one after another. So right now, because I'm the first one in the slot, I'm the only one who's actually able to place something on the session. Everyone has to wait for me. So this tool is intended to be used together with something like Zoom, where we have the audio track where we coordinate. We can present our sessions and then place them in different time slots. But that's very intentional, that we want to have this open space feeling in the app itself. The UI is inspired by this open space moderation technique, and it's supposed to look that way too. One thing that I like about this is that with this web app, we actually can make this experience accessible for all users, whereas even in a live in-person event, it's actually not accessible for all users because bulletin boards actually are not accessible for all users. So we really like our bulletin boards, but I think this is kind of one thing I really like about this is, bulletin boards are not accessible for blind people. But if we can somehow take that online in a digital way and make the information there accessible for any user, screen reader users, like keyboard users, all different kinds of users with different abilities, then it makes it so much better. So I get a little excited about that. This information here is also this is the notification telling me that I'm next in line. That is also uses the same what is it called, the role status and aria-live polite attributes. I think it depends on the assistive technology that's being used. So for some screen reader users, for some assistive technologies, role status would be sufficient. but aria-live polite adds to that. So I used them both because I want to make sure that I support as many technologies as possible. But one thing I also use with this this notification up here is when I'm developing for accessibility, I also have mobile in the back of my mind as well. So in mobile, it's actually kind of the same. So if I'm scrolling through the page and I'm down here looking at something, like the Friday slot, it would also it's the same kind of thing as with a screen reader user. I also wouldn't normally see this information. I wouldn't normally see this notification which pops up. So for mobile users, I make sure that it's visible by making it sticky so it stays in the viewport because it's important information. And for screen reader users, I added these extra role, status, and aria-live polite attributes to make sure that it's read out to a screen reader user so they have the information that they need. Now, so now we come to the question. I can show you again. I wanted to show something else. So the question is how do I know, like if I'm down here looking at this, how do I actually know how to schedule a session? So I see here, I added both a link here and one here, which will link to this, if I click on here, it links to the session itself. And the same is here when I click on it. So then I come to the actual plan where I can actually select things. And that is similar. It's similar between assistive technologies. If I'm down here, I said if I'm down here, that's actually not very accessible speech, because if somebody can't see where here is, then they won't know, they won't have any way to orient. So one way that we can use to make our applications more accessible is that we can add links within our application itself. So we don't say, okay, in order to position your slot, you need to go to the scheduling part on the right side of the page. That's not accessible because maybe you're on a mobile phone and the schedule is not on the right side of the page, or maybe you're using a screen reader and dimensions are completely irrelevant. But instead, I add a link to that section so that I can click on it and then find the place where I need to be. So I'll zoom back out here. Yeah. So now you see that here it disappeared, the link, because in this instance I hide it visually from people who have a large viewpoint, a larger viewport. Sorry, and because here I assume that the proximity of the two areas is close enough that the link wouldn't be helpful for sighted users. So I did hide that here, but it's still visually, it's only visually hidden. That means it's still available for screen reader users. Yeah, and then the next thing that everyone notices a lot of times is they try to pull this. They try to pull this little. It looks like a sticky note. We're used to Miro, so they try to do drag and drop and drop it on the different slots. But the thing is when I built this, I thought, okay, what is an alternative to drag and drop? Because drag and drop is not really very accessible. Yeah. It's not very accessible. So when we, it's also not keyboard accessible. Drag and drop is also not keyboard accessible. It's also not mobile friendly. So drag and drop itself kind of, it cuts down the user group who can actually use the application quite immensely. And so what I decided to do instead is that I decided to add buttons here. So in order to place a slot, I can actually select one of these buttons and then it will be placed inside that slot. And that's a good basis functionality. What I could do in the future is I could, with progressive enhancement, modify the application so that both work. So it would be quite easy with a small amount of client-side JavaScript to modify the application so I could add a drag and drop behavior, and when the user actually drops the slot on one of the buttons, the button is then selected, and the user can and then it's positioned. what I also wanted to show is kind of to look at these slots itself. If we look at them in the let me see. Am I here? I can look at this. So kind of to look at the structure of the HTML. Here, this is actually a table. The HTML structure, which means that the reason I chose a table as a structure is because with assistive technologies, you can navigate, like with a screen reader, you can navigate through a table using arrow keys. So you can kind of move up and down within the rows and the columns to move to the place where you want to get. But we also tried to tweak the text a bit and modify the text to improve it. This is something that I worked together with Andreas, and we did some iterations to try to improve the text. So one thing that you see here is the choose slot button. Choose slot is not actually a very good action just by itself, because you can see it's repeated like over and over and over again. Throughout the application. So if someone was just iterating from button to button, it would just say choose slot, choose slot, choose slot, choose slot, and you don't have any information at all about what that is, like which slot it is. So what I did is I added an area described by attribute, which references the ID of here. It's a slot description. It has the class visually hidden, so this is something that's only available for screen reader users, but by adding this area described by attribute, that adds that information and makes it available to assistive technology, so that they can tell you, choose this slot, and which slot is it? Oh, it's the slot on Donnerstag from 1300 to 1400 in the room Munich. So that's this slot description is always there. And by adding this area described by attribute, I can associate it with the actual button element, which means that when I'm iterating through the user interface, then it will read this information to me. So, yeah, I have one question here in the chat, and that is, what screen reader do I use to test my web apps? So I personally use VoiceOver to test my web apps. That's the one I usually use. I think it's good to test your web applications using a screen reader. I think trying to just learn one is maybe it was enough for me for the beginning. I was able to find with VoiceOver, I'm able to find a lot of things that I think are probably issues, and am able to fix them before having someone who's really a screen reader expert use the tool. So that's what I usually do. I usually use VoiceOver. Now I have on my virtual machine, my Windows virtual machine, I also have NVDA installed. Sorry, my German is coming out. But I also have it installed on my Windows virtual machine, so I also would be able to use NVDA. But I'm not very good at using NVDA. So I've learned a little bit about how to use VoiceOver. I'm also not very good at that. But I can, like, with even the basics, using the basics of a screen reader to be able to learn how to navigate, like just navigate one element after another throughout the application, make sure everything, when it's read, that it's clear what that element means, and making sure that the structure of the application has a good structure. That's what you can find that out really, really easily by using a screen reader. Yeah, so what we also did is we tweaked this text here with the slot description. So one thing that I wasn't aware of is that some redundant information can sometimes be sometimes redundant information can be difficult, because like before, what we had in this slot description is we had time. We said time, and then this time. So when a screen reader was reading it, it would say time, Donnerstag 13 Uhr bis 14 Uhr, and then it would say room Munich. But that's kind of redundant. So the screen reader user has to wait for the time, that split second when it actually says time, before it actually reads the time. But when you just hear the time, when it just says Donnerstag 13 bis 14 Uhr, you kind of know, okay, that is the time. So the time is completely redundant, so we just took that out. And what we also did is the room, so it seemed, when in our test, it seemed that the time was more important than the room. So when we are iterating through the table, we say the time first and then the room, because theoretically, if you're navigating through the different rooms, like you're navigating down in the table and you want to go through the different rooms, you already know what room it is. So it maybe is not so important to know the time right away. So that's just something we tweaked. It's something you could continue to change in the future if necessary. Yeah. So now I'm going to actually navigate to the slot, and I'm going to actually choose a slot, and we can you can see. So here now you can see this is also screen reader accessible. Maybe in the future I would like to change it so that you can also navigate with arrow keys within this table. Right now it only works with the tab key, but that's something I could do in the future. So now what you can see is that I went through, I selected the slot that I wanted. I did this with the keyboard. One of the nice things about improving screen reader accessibility is that you almost automatically get good keyboard accessibility as well, because screen reader users are keyboard users for the most part. So now I've actually selected my slot, and now you can see how the application reacts. So now I am no longer at the front of the queue. I've already selected my slot. So now Stephanie is at the front of the queue, and she sees this view that I saw before. Now I don't have any way of selecting a button to move. And so now she's she has selected a slot and positioned her session in that slot. And we can see down here, this is also an informational slot in the UI. So we can kind of see this is also something that is sticky, because I think it's important. Is this kind of information? How do you know what just happened in the UI if there's no notification or information to let you know? So here we have this session accessibility from Stephanie will take place on Donnerstag 13 bis 14 Uhr in the Offenbach room. So that's, if we look at that, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to look at it. You can also see this is the same. It uses the role region and the area role polite attribute. And yeah. So that's also, that will be read to any screen reader users, but it's also useful information for anybody. So if they missed, somebody, they don't know when it was positioned, then they can just look at the UI and they have the information. Okay, which session was placed last, what time was it placed in which room, and then they have this information as well. So when I was developing the application, that's one of the things I was thinking about. You want to have helpful messages that will be read to a screen reader, but you also don't want to completely overwhelm the screen reader user and like talk the whole time. I mean, that's not the point of this of adding these area roles. So I was very selective and careful, because I didn't want to have too much information be read to a screen reader user all the time. We have an issue in like Zoom. When we have remote events, that the Zoom by default will read every message in the chat with the screen reader whenever it appears in the chat. And that was also something I had in the back of my mind, because that's really irritating for screen reader users to have that as soon as to have that going as soon as somebody wants to chat, because they want to talk about something asynchronously. But for a screen reader user, it's not asynchronous; it's read out all the time. And can be quite disturbing. So we actually have a rule in our company Slack, company events and things, that we don't use Zoom chat for chatting. We say we do that kind of chatting in Slack, and in Zoom we only will ever put important things in our Zoom chat. So it's something we also do. And for this, in this instance, I really wanted to make sure that the information that we list here is important and useful for the user. And this is something I thought that was very important. So when you're thinking about an open space, updates for everybody, but here is one of these words that's not very accessible. Yeah, so that's what I wanted with this notification. I wanted to make that accessible for everybody. Even if somebody says I want to go here, then you get the information in a way that's easy to read. This is also something that can help with cognitive accessibility. So when we're talking about accessibility, we're not only talking about screen reader users, blind users. We're also talking about people who might have cognitive limitations, and it's difficult to use applications because they're so complicated. It's difficult to think about them. We can also improve the experience for them by adding these things into the application. So that's also very important. Exactly. So another thing we can do is we can also move the session, and so we're the same thing here is for somebody on the desktop computer or with a mouse, the first thing we want to do is do drag and drop, but that's also, again, not accessible. So what I did here is I just had, when you click on it, it opens a new window, and then I can kind of do the same thing. So here, my session is listed. I can see where my session is. There's a text there, but I can also choose a different slot to put my session in. If you want, Stephanie posted the link to the chat. Stephanie posted the link in the chat to the application. If anybody wants to try to add their own application or their own session to the queue and see what it feels like to position it within the schedule, then feel free to do so. Then we might just see your sessions pop up here. So feel free if you want to. If you don't, that's also okay. Okay. If there's any questions, please just type them in the chat. I have some other points that I wanted to mention, but if there's anything else, then I can touch on them. One thing that I did, like if we look at it, I wanted to show this in VoiceOver, but I can't. When I open VoiceOver, it doesn't do screen sharing. So I'm just going to show it in the actual HTML code. One thing I really like about my method of programming is that when you have a real focus on accessibility, you pay a lot of attention to the HTML because you want to choose the best HTML elements as possible so that things can that it has some kind of information. And so what we can do, one benefit of that is that I think the HTML is actually really readable. So if I look here, I have a header, I have a nav element, I have a main element. That's one thing that I think is very important. The header has specific roles. So the header, nav, and main have specific roles, which they're landmarks. And a landmark it's a special, like it means they have a special role, which means that they are available for screen reader users. So if I have a screen reader user, I can go to any page and I can say pull up all the landmarks on this page, and then it will list out here's the banner, here's the nav region, navigation region, here's the main region. And so with these three elements, I've added 3 points to my application where I can spring directly to those points within the application. Another thing that I did is that I added, I made sure that my heading levels were correct. So here I have 3 headings. I have a Spacy test event heading, which is my H1. I have here an H2, suggest a new session, and I have here sessions as one heading, and then I'll here queue. So the heading levels, I don't skip over any heading levels. It's another thing. If as someone who's using an assistive technology, when I want to navigate to the application, I can open this application. I can open the a list of all the headings on the page. I can read them out, have them read out, and so then I can spring directly to the heading that I find interesting at that point in time. So that is really important. As heading levels and using landmarks is one of the most important things when you're developing web accessibility. We're developing an application with good web accessibility. Because we want these headings should also, they should really produce they should really offer a nice document structure. They should really say tell us what information there is on the page in a nice structured way. One thing you can also see here is that the Spacy test event, this is my H1, it's not required for an H1 to be bigger than an H2. It's perfectly fine for me. Here, Spacy test event is my H1, but I made it much smaller because that's not the main point of this specific page. So the H2s here are much more prominent than the H1, but I still made sure that the structure of the headings is correct. What we can also look at is we can look at the different built-in HTML elements that I use in this application. So here, these elements here, if we look at them, you get some collapsing action in here. I use the built-in element details and summary, which gives me this collapser element kind of by default, so that works with HTML. So all of the description, I'm kidding, pictures on the web are not accessible. It's very sad. Yeah, so here we can see that just expands and contracts the different the content. So the description is something I didn't want to always be shown, I wanted to be hidden. So I put that inside of details element so that it's only shown when the user clicks on it. Another element I use here is a description list element, which is the DL element with the DT and the DD element. So this I use to list out the sponsor, because it's kind of a key value pair. So a description list, there's the DT element, which stands for the term, and the DD is the definition. And so that kind of it's a built-in element for saying, okay, here's a category of things, and here's the thing that it belongs to that category. So I use that for this sponsor joy part. I use buttons in order to actually do something. So when I have an action, I make sure to put it in an actual HTML button element, which is really important. It's not a div, it's not a link, it's an actual button. And the important thing about buttons is that they are, you can press a button by either selecting space or by clicking enter. And another very important thing here is when I use label on my input fields, I use the for attribute to make sure that my label is connected to my input element. So here I have the input with the name title or the ID title, and so I use label for title, and that makes sure that the information title is available to screen reader. So if I were to go through here with a screen reader, it would read out input text, title, input text, and then it would read here description, enter text. So it tells me exactly what field it is and what I'm supposed to do with it. Same thing with buttons. With a button, it'll tell me here's button, so here's the text of the button, and then it's something I can click. Yeah. So another thing, if I do another test event, another element that I use is a list element. So here I actually have an ordered list. So I used an ordered list element. I also didn't I didn't make it look like anything except an ordered list. This is actually default styling. And that's something that I like to do. I like this kind of this is also the same default styling for a details element. I didn't hide that. Designers might think it's ugly, but I kind of like it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think that's the main things that I prepared. One last thing I can talk about is internationalization. So if I just set my accept language header in my browser, but what I made sure to do is make sure that it works for both German and English, which are the languages that we primarily speak at our company. mainly German, but some English as well. And so I made sure that it works in both. And the reason for that is that if you use the lang, if you set the lang, sorry, that's what I wanted. If you set the lang attribute of the application, which I've done here, then theoretically screen readers and assistive technology should be able to choose their voice for which voice would be best to read this text out. But I've found that VoiceOver doesn't do that. Like if I have my German voice set up, then it will read out English to me in a German voice, which I don't, I was like, okay, is that a problem that's common? I talked to Andreas. He said, yeah, I'm just used to I'm used to English pages being read out to me in a German accent. And I was like, okay, that's good. But I think we can do better. So one thing is that I now believe that if we want to pay attention to accessibility, then it's good also to pay attention to internationalization, make sure that the applications are kind of translated into the language that is best for the user who's requesting the content. Yeah, I think that's all I have today. Thank you everyone for coming. I don't know if anyone has a question. Yeah, Jens is talking about how he's too dumb to use VoiceOver. But maybe we can do this another time. It's not that difficult. That's all I can say.
So you still have a chance to pose questions. There's another one. How about Denglish web apps?
Yeah, this is kind of Denglish because the times are hard coded, but that's something that yeah.
So to me, my main takeaway is that really a lot of effort needs to go into the preparation. Like when you have all the information and you have to decide which one is essential and needs to be read out in which way by the screen reader, right?
Yes. Yeah. A lot comes down to what is really essential to be shown right now, at what time. My theory is that we as programmers should be paying attention to that anyway. This shouldn't be just, oh, we need to, like accessibility is really more than just, oh, we need to do this for one, we need to do this just for blind people. It's like you should be making these decisions for everybody,
Right. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about how much time went into developing this? Because maybe somebody thinks like, ooh, that sounds like a lot of effort going into this.
Yeah, so Jan and I, we're actually going to, in a few weeks, on the 3rd of November, Jan and I are going to be showing the back end of Spacy. I think we named the session Spacing Out. And we're going to be talking a lot more about the technology behind the application. It was written in Clojure, which we both love, and this kind of the architecture and the technology side of it. So we'll be talking more about that there. But we both, I think, we did it kind of on our Fridays. We decided we were going to do it, and we blocked out our Friday every week to work on it for a few months. I want to say it's maybe total 20 project days, possibly 25. I was going to go look on GitHub and see if I could figure it out, but I didn't. It is on GitHub, so you can go look and see how many commits we made and on what days, and kind of figure that out, how many days of work we took. But it wasn't that much. It was definitely, I would say it's definitely less than 30 project days for both of us.
Okay, I'm going to post the link in the chat to the GitHub repository. So thank you very much, Joy. A lot of useful information on how to build applications that are actually accessible. And again, I'd like to invite you to join us tonight. The next session starts at 6 p.m. We have 3 more talks there in total. All talks will be in German. I posted the link in the chat box, so feel free to join us. And I hope to see you all soon.